Hey, what's up, Mavs fans? Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me for the latest episode of Inside The Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to download and subscribe to Inside The Mavs wherever you get podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. You can download it on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video as well and subscribe to Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. Disappointing night for the Dallas Mavericks once again as they fall to the Indiana Pacers 137-120 at the AAC as they go to 0-2 on their current 3-game homestand, now 34-28 on the season, 18-15 at the double AC in a game where the Mavericks simply were horrendous again on the defensive end. Despite the fact that Luka Doncic got his 4th consecutive triple-double, the Mavs, though, now 2-6 in the last 8 triple-doubles that Luka Doncic has had. So it really hasn't mattered when he's put up these gaudy numbers. The Mavericks have found a way to lose most of the time, despite the incredible numbers that he's putting up. And once again, he had incredible numbers in the game against the Pacers, where Doncic goes for 39 points, 11 assists, and 10 rebounds, going 15-30 from the field. But the Mavericks only had 4 guys in double figures. You got 20 points for P.J. Washington, 23 points from Kyrie Irving, and a really nice double-double from Daniel Gafford, who had 16 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocked shots, going a perfect 7-7 from the field. But it didn't matter because the defense couldn't stop anything that Indiana put forward. Indiana had 9 guys in double figures, including Miles Turner, who had 20 points in the game, Tyrese Halliburton, who was spectacular in that third quarter, a guy who had been struggling coming into the game against the Mavericks, found a get-right opponent in Dallas, and the defense left a lot to be desired as they give up a $137 in the loss. The Mavericks now have lost 5 of their last 6 games, still remain 8th in the Western Conference. But when you look at the Western Conference standings right now, after Phoenix got the win over the Denver Nuggets on Tuesday night, based off of what we know, the Mavericks now 34-28, as I mentioned. They are now just a half game above the Los Angeles Lakers for the 9th spot in the West, and just a full game on the Golden State Warriors above them for the 10th spot in the West, which is key because you and I know the Mavericks have 3 games left still against the Golden State Warriors. Not only do they have 3 games left against the Warriors, they've got a couple of games left against the Sacramento Kings as well. So things are going to get dicey down the stretch for this Mavericks team. But we're going to focus our conversation on this episode is obviously the defense and how horrendous it's been. In the last 6 games, now having lost 5 of those last 6, the Mavericks are dead last in defensive rating. In fact, some of the numbers to give you an idea on how things have been so porous for this Mavericks defense over the last now week or so. 30th in defensive rating, number 26 overall in net rating, dead last in 3-point percentage allowed, 29th in points per game allowed, 29th in field goal percentage allowed, and 26th in free throw makes by their opponent allowed over the last 6 games. That is how bad this defense has been. And what concerns me, and something we'll continue to talk about during this particular episode, is the fact that we're still having the same conversations about this defense yet again, despite the change in personnel that's been made by bringing in P.J. Washington and Daniel Gafford, bringing in Dante Exum and Derrick Jones Jr., who were to provide athleticism, length, and defense for this team with the additions of Jones and Exum at the beginning of the season, and then, of course, the midseason acquisitions of Washington and P.J. Gafford. Washington had gotten off to a really good start on the defensive end, but the bottom has fallen out for the entirety of this defense. And for them to give up 137 points after the last time they saw the Indiana Pacers, because you remember the last time they saw Indiana, they gave up over 130 points in that game. In fact, let's go back and look at what that score was when the Mavericks took on the Indiana Pacers. when you look at that game that they had, they gave up, that's right, 133 points to the Indiana Pacers just over a week ago. The delicious irony of the game on Tuesday night was the fact that the Mavericks were down by 4 points going into the second half. The Pacers used a 20-6 run to open up the third quarter and really run away from the game from the Mavericks there, where they were up by 18 at the end of 3. Does that remind you of something? Oh, that's right. When they were in Indiana just over a week ago, they were down by 4 in the fourth quarter after Kyrie Irving had gotten them back in it in that fourth quarter, and the Pacers used a 20-4 run to put it away against the Mavericks on the road in Indiana. And now the Pacers has swept the season series, and now they break their own little 2-game losing streak that they had of their own by beating the Mavericks on Tuesday night. So big runs doomed this team, especially against the Pacers in both games. The first time in the fourth quarter, this time in the third quarter, where the Mavericks started that third quarter 2 of 14 from the field, and the bottom fell out of it, only scoring 18 points in that third quarter. And really from there, it didn't matter, as they were trading baskets in the fourth quarter, as the Pacers are able to maintain their lead and go on to win the game by 17, scoring those 137 points. So you're seeing the pattern here based off of what the Mavericks have been doing in the last 6 games and what they have done in the last 2 times, the only 2 times that they played against the Indiana Pacers. Before I go any further, trust me, I've got plenty on this episode. Let's hear from today's sponsor of our video, and that being Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Appreciate you hanging out with me through that break there, and appreciate today's sponsor of our video in Aura. The Mavericks falling 137-120 to the Indiana Pacers, now lost 5 of their last 6 games, have got some soul searching to do before they welcome in the Miami Heat on Thursday night, where the Heat are 11-3 in their last 14 games, have really turned things around after having a long losing streak themselves, and have gotten themselves back in it as far as the Eastern Conference is concerned. So the Mavericks got work to do before they welcome in Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. They won't practice on Wednesday ahead of their game on Thursday. And what's concerning is this is a team that had, quote unquote, a really great film session ahead of the game on Tuesday against the Pacers, and it simply didn't look like anything that they had studied on film they put to execution in the game against Indiana. What bothered me quite a bit in this game is that a lot of the things that the Pacers were able to do offensively, they did the exact same thing against the Mavericks on Tuesday night. Miles Turner in the short roll, being able to hit the mid-range jumper on pick and pop situations, being able to knock down shots. Too many straight line drives for guys like Benedict Mathurin, who had a terrific second quarter. Tyrese Halliburton, who had 12 points in the third quarter, being able to get to the mid-range and be able to get to the basket at will, being able to take the ball to the basket for straight line drives and getting layups time and time again. There was simply no resistance for this Mavericks defense. Even at times when Daniel Gafford was able to provide it, it didn't feel like it was consistent enough throughout the entire team to be able to do so. And yes, during the stretch in the third quarter where they went cold, that is the time where you've got to be able to turn up your defense to be able to keep yourself in a game and not allow the game to get away from you the way that it did in the third quarter. And for the Mavericks, that simply happened way too much in this particular game. Not being able to stay in front of guys like Halliburton, whether it be TJ McConnell, who played well in the game as well. The Mavericks at the point of attack simply could not handle what the Indiana Pacers presented. And yes, the Pacers are a bad matchup. They're the best offensive team in the league. They love to push the pace. And I said it before the game on Tuesday. You do not want to get into a track meet with the Indiana Pacers. And yes, I know the Mavericks are a top 10 pace team and have been so for the majority of the year. But the Pacers take it to a completely different level. And no matter what, whether it looks like they're running offense or not, they are wanting to push the tempo throughout the entirety of the 48 minutes. And the Mavericks simply couldn't keep up. And when you don't make shots and you still see the Pacers be able to get out in transition, that's when things go awry. In fact, in this game, you got crushed on the bench. You look at the bench disparity between the Pacers and the Mavericks. The bench for the Pacers outscored the Mavericks 69-32. That is completely inexcusable in a game where the Pacers had 9 guys in double figures and got the amount of contributions that they did. So obviously, for what the Mavericks were not able to do defensively, the Pacers exploited it all night long. But the bigger discussion and larger talking point for today's episode is the fact that 3 years into Jason Kidd's tenure, we are still talking about at times the lack of defensive effort and execution, the chemistry and the trust not being there on a consistent night-to-night basis, and why we still have to continue to talk about this despite the amount of conversation that Jason Kidd has had with his team about this, regardless of the personnel that's been on this basketball team. I remember asking Jason Kidd in December of 2021 why the message isn't resonating about this team when they don't make shots, that they continue to hang their heads on the defensive end. And what he said at that point was this team, quote unquote, wasn't built to play defense. And I don't care if shots aren't going down or if they are going down. You need to have that kind of same intensity on the defensive end, regardless of what things are happening or not happening on the offensive end. In fact, to illustrate my point here, take a listen and watch Jason Kidd answer a similar question after PJ Washington had addressed some of it during his media availability after the game against the Pacers. Here is what Jason Kidd had to say about how this team, what they are offensively as it relates to their defense, and why their offense is their defense, Jason?
Coach PJ Washington talked a little bit about the defense and talked about how important effort is for defense. What kind of things do you say to your guys if they're lacking effort on defense or if they're lacking some energy?
Well, I have a joke. Is that all right if I give you a joke?
Give me a joke, Andrew.
Yeah, well, it's going to be both. I've told you this, and you guys, for whatever reason, don't listen. Our offense is our defense. Have I not said that?
You said it.
Okay. So when we score, we will play defense. And I'm half joking, but I'm being also serious. Like when we put the ball in the basket, we are really good on both ends. The next step, and it's a small step, is when we don't score, can we play defense? It's really simple, right? And so when we watch the game, we're scoring, they're scoring. It's a 4-point game. It's anybody's game. When we didn't score, we stopped playing defense. So now the next step is to be able to recognize that and be able to play defense. And so to answer your question without the joke or being sarcastic, it's just a matter of being able to be unselfish and sacrifice. And once we get to that point, we're going to be really good.
Their offense is their defense. You've heard that several times from Jason Kidd. In fact, you heard him there say, I've said this quite a bit, that our offense is our defense. When we score, we play good defense. That shouldn't be the mantra and mentality of any NBA team. I don't care how good you are offensively and how that relates to your defense, because what we have seen now for a team this year that's just 6 games above 500 now, they're giving up nearly 118 points per game to their opponent. And we have seen this team continuously be inconsistent on that side of the floor. And the question I asked 2 years ago is the same one that I have now. Why isn't this message resonating with his team to the point that regardless of roster and personnel, that the message has not been received the way that the players have needed to receive it in order to execute it on a night-to-night basis? Because that, to me, is a huge problem, that you've communicated the same message over and over again, and it still has not been fixed to the point where there's a measure of consistency and execution on the defensive end, night in and night out. I'm a parent, and I'm sure a lot of you are parents. I don't like to tell my kid the same thing 3, 4, 5, 6 different times before they actually do it, because if I have to, then that means there's consequences coming on the other side of it, because you didn't follow directions or you didn't execute what I asked you to do the first time or the second or the third time. It's the same thing here. Where is the accountability based off of what the Mavericks defensively haven't done based on what Jason Kidd is communicating to them? Because normally there are consequences. There are repercussions for the inability to do what you have been asked to do over and over again. And that is where there's a lot of frustration for Mavericks fans, based on the fact that this team, regardless if they go on a 7-game win streak or now they're on losing 5 out of their last 6 games, they have not seen a change from not just the communication about the defense, but also the execution of the defense from the top down. Even with Luka Doncic being a guy this year putting more effort on the defensive end, been top 10 in terms of steals per game throughout most of the season, he even saying it after the game, look, we got to play better defense. And we've heard it time and time again. When this team is engaged on the defensive end, turning defense into offense, getting up and down in transition, helping the pace to be able to put pressure on opposing teams, this is when their team is at their best. When they're defending, getting into passing lanes, and knocking down three-pointers. And in this game, they simply did not do that to the rate that you would want them to. They only hit 13 three-pointers, going 13 to 39 from downtown. And in this game, they saw 20 points be scored off the 9 turnovers that they had against the Pacers. It simply cannot happen. And for Jason Kidd, there needs to be accountability for the way that this team played. During the post-game press conference, he also said that Rome wasn't built in a day. You've been at building Rome here for the past almost 3 years now. And shout out to my man Dalton Trigg of the Step Back Mavs podcast, who said and tweeted out after the game on Tuesday evening that since the Western Conference final run that the Mavericks they went on, the Mavericks are 72 and 72, and even 500 since reaching the Western Conference finals against the Golden State Warriors. They have been consistently mediocre, whether it's been change in personnel, whether it's been change in pace of play or style of play and how they've wanted to pick up the pace in terms of what they want to do on offense and on defense. It simply hasn't garnered the kind of overall success that we have been looking for. And for this team now, with 20 games left, as I mentioned, we've laid out some of it in terms of some of the opponents that they have. 3 games against the Golden State Warriors, a couple of games against the Sacramento Kings, still got games against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets as well, before they continue or conclude, I should say, their regular season. This is not going to be easy. In fact, as he mentioned a little bit earlier, the Miami Heat, 11-3 in their last 14 games, a team that can get after you and punch you in the mouth. And that's what I want to see now from this team. How does this team respond? Kidd talking about it after the game also, that there are several guys who haven't been through this kind of test, specifically mentioning Derek Lively. Derek Lively going through a little bit of a rough patch as he's obviously playing in his rookie year, hasn't played obviously the amount of minutes and time spent on the floor that he's playing right now and maybe hitting a little bit of a rookie wall. That's why you acquired Daniel Gafford to be able to help you, and he was good in the amount of time that he played in the 21 minutes that he had against the Pacers. So Derek Lively learning from this, PJ Washington learning this, Daniel Gafford the same way. But there are players on this team, Luka and Kyrie, who have been there, and now it is up to them and their head coach to help this team get through this rough patch. Because here's what has happened now. You had the 7-game win streak. You've basically given it all back by losing 5 of 6, and it could be 6 of 7 if you don't get it together against Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat, who I'm sure are going to be playing with the kind of pride and passion and energy and focus that they don't want to see the Mavericks get a win at their expense and try to get some of that momentum back that's been lost now over the last week or so. And for Jason Kidd, the time to be accountable for what this team hasn't been able to do on the defensive end, that falls squarely on his shoulders. Tim Legler of ESPN, who has been a staunch supporter of the Mavericks, especially with the moves that they made at the trade deadline, called them out on Tuesday ahead of their games, saying, look, this team doesn't play the kind of defense that gives you confidence that they can be a contender in the Western Conference, because if they did, they would be a team that would be extremely dangerous by the time you get to the playoffs. But right now, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, this team is not dangerous at all. They're horrendously bad on the defensive end, and there are no two ways about it. If you watch the game against the Pacers, if you've watched over the last several games, even in the heartbreaker that they had against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Max Strus going off in that fourth quarter, scoring 15 points. Even in the game against Toronto that they won, giving up over 120 points in that game to Toronto. The defense simply hasn't been there, and maybe it's time to change some of the things that look from a lineup standpoint. Kidd even talking about that also after the game on Tuesday, that there may need to be some lineup changes and maybe shortening of the rotation based on what the Mavericks aren't doing and executing on the defensive end. Because for them to allow the Pacers to basically do the exact same thing to them to the tune of deja vu, whether it was the fourth quarter in the first matchup or the third quarter in the second matchup, is inexcusable at this point. This team has too much talent at the top with Luka and Kyrie to be dealing with the possible idea that if you don't get out of that 7 or 8 spot in the play-in, you're either the 9 or the 10 seed, which means you don't have to win just one game. You have to win 2 games to get in to the NBA playoffs in the Western Conference. And that should not be the case for this team. So it is gut check time for the Dallas Mavericks. How do they respond with the adversity that they've been through? A team that's been through a lot, the most starting lineups in the league, the amount of injuries that they've dealt with, but yet and still, no matter what, they have not been able to play the kind of consistent defense needed to be thought of as a serious contender. And look, I fell for it too. The 7-game win streak that they went on was clearly a mirage. When you go back and look at the teams that they beat, a shorthanded Knicks team, a bad Brooklyn Nets team, they beat a bad Wizards team and a Spurs team as well. Yes, they beat Philadelphia, but Philadelphia was reeling off of the loss of Joel Embiid. But then you do beat down the Oklahoma City Thunder, showing the capability that you can defend, only giving up 111 points while dropping 146 on the head of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the Oklahoma City Thunder. Then you come out of the All-Star break with a nice win against Kevin Durant in the Phoenix Suns, and you feel like you've beaten a couple of teams in the West that you look at and you say, if we play with the kind of focus and mindset on both ends of the floor, we can compete with the best teams in the West. But then when you look at what's happened over the last 6 games, you lose to the Indiana Pacers. You lose the heartbreaker, of course, to the Cleveland Cavaliers. You were able to beat a team like the Toronto Raptors, who aren't very good. But then at the same time, you get the brakes beat off of you by Boston. You let Tyrese Maxey take you to school in your building on Sunday. And then Tyrese part number 2 comes in, gets himself right along with Miles Turner. And they do the exact same thing that they did to you over a week ago, and that's beat you. So they haven't beaten the kind of quality teams on a consistent basis that gives you an idea that they could come out of it to be able to beat some of those teams down the road. But at the same time, They've beaten a bunch of bad teams that may have made their record look a little bit better than what it actually is, because, as the late Dennis Green said, we are who they thought they were. But I'm not going to let the Mavericks off the hook in this particular case. They have enough. Jason Kidd saying also, this team has enough to be able to handle their business. Are they going to show the chemistry and the trust, and more importantly, the energy and focus night in and night out to be able to execute what's being asked of them? Luka Doncic saying after the game against the Pacers that these coaches are working extremely hard to put us in the positions to succeed on the defensive end. So the question then becomes, how come you're not executing it? Where is the lack of focus? Where is the energy? Where is the effort? Or what is not connecting? Where is the disconnect between the message that's given, the film study that's done, by the time that you get on the floor, that all of it seems like goes out of the window? And I don't want to hear blaming Tim Hardaway Jr. or any specific person. This is a collective team effort on how horrendous this defense has been. And that is why they've got to figure it out, because they cannot find themselves in this position going forward for the rest of the year. Because based off of what they're doing right now, I don't care how many points they score, they simply won't be able to stop anybody, whether it be in a play-in situation or in a regular playoff series in the West. That is how dire this is right now. And maybe the Mavericks themselves aren't hitting the panic button, which is probably the most important thing. But they need to find a concerned one and hit that one, because there should be a lot of concern about the fact that no matter how the message is presented, no matter who's presenting that message, it's not connecting and resonating to the point of execution that allows them to be much better on that end. And the results now are showing it. And that's the tune of losing basketball games. And the one that's most responsible for that is Jason Kidd. Those are the breaks. You're the head coach. You're the one that sets the tone. Yes, do players want to hear that same message from other players because it may connect a little bit better? Sure. You always feel like you're going to be a little bit better when you hear from a peer yourself, but leadership begins with the head coach. It begins with setting that tone and ensuring that he, not only from a schematic standpoint, but just an overall motivation and effort standpoint, communicates with them effectively enough for them to change the behavior. Because if the behavior isn't changing based off of the message that's being delivered, either the messenger needs to change or the person who's not executing the behavior needs to change. And they've been trying to change the people who haven't been executing the behavior. They've been trying to figure that out. The one thing that still is there is the one communicating the message. And maybe that is the change that's needed. I'm not sure. But one thing that's not going to happen is Jason Kidd's not going to be removed as head coach this season. For all of you who are calling for the firing of Jason Kidd, that's not going to happen this season. 20 games left. What good does it do to do that now? It's not going to happen. I understand the visceral reaction, the upset reaction for Mavericks fans. I get it. Trust me, I get it. But what this team has to do is figure out a way based on what they are right now to get it turned around and get it turned around before the season is over with. And then once the season is over with, now we're looking at a complete evaluation of everything from the top down and what may or may not need to change based on who is or who isn't on this team and who needs to communicate the messages to be able to get the most out of this team. But Jason Kidd right now has to get the most out of this group and figure out the right button to push in order to do it. Otherwise, this isn't changing anytime soon. The Mavericks get back on the floor on Thursday night when they take on the Miami Heat. They are again off on Wednesday. They will not practice on Wednesday as they get themselves ready to take on Jimmy Butler and a red-hot Miami Heat basketball team playing some terrific ball right now. But the Mavericks fall to the Indiana Pacers 137-120. Unfortunately, a dismal night for the Mavericks once again on the defensive end, something that's becoming all too common over the last week or so, and it's to the tune of now having lost 5 of their last 6 games and watching teams like the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors creep up on them in the Western Conference, which is shaping up to be a wild finish in the final 20 or so games of this regular season. And if the Mavericks are going to have an opportunity to get out of their play-in, they need to turn it around with a quickness that they're not showing on the defensive end right now. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavericks podcast, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. I'm your Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. You can catch me every single Mavs radio broadcast for your Dallas Mavericks. And be sure to like and comment on this video as well. And subscribe to my channel here at Kevin Gray Sports if you're watching the show on my YouTube channel. Until next time here on Inside the Mavs, my name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. I'll talk to you later. Peace.